Are starting to come in. So hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ, and I'm happy to welcome you today to Entrust's very first webinar with us. They haven't done one with us before, so I'm excited to have them on our webinar stage. Before we dive in, just going to cover a couple of housekeeping details for you. We are recording today's session, and you will get a link to the recording tomorrow. I'll make sure you get that in email along with any other resources or links that you might need. Also, we'd like you to submit your questions today in the Q&A panel. You can send those in at any time. We're probably going to save most of those for the end of the presentation, but do type those in as you have them so that you don't forget, and we'll get to those as we can. All right, so let me introduce our presenters today. We have from Entrust, we have Rohan Ramesh. He is the Director of Product Marketing. Hello.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you.
And joining him from Citrix is Daniel Vaz. He's a Senior Manager of Product Development at Citrix. Hello.
Hello, thank you. By the way, this title has changed, so I'm actually now, but yeah.
Good to know. All right, and then last but not least, we have James Rankin. He is a CTP and a member of the UK CUGC group, and he's going to be helping us with all the Q&A today. So hello, James.
Hello, I am sad to say I probably look like I've been dragged through a bush and everybody else is looking very smart and presentable, but it is the end of my day and I'm sat in a very hot office and I've actually been having to do work today, which is a terrible thing. So I apologize if I look very stressed and sort of ragged.
Oh, I think you look fine. Okay, so I am going to hand things right on over to Rohan and Daniel and let you guys get us started. So I think, Rohan, you can grab the screen. I may have to push the stop sharing. Okay.
Sounds good. Let me know if you guys can see that.
That looks good.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So we'll be talking about how Entrust and Citrix work together and how the integration works and how Entrust can help secure your Citrix environment with strong adaptive multi-factor authentication solutions from Entrust. So before I dive in, just to give you sort of a brief background about the integration and the relationship between Entrust and Citrix. We've been partners for a very long time. We had a product specifically built for integrating into Citrix called Entrust Essentials back in 2005. It was one of only 3 solutions back then in the market to be natively integrated into the Citrix web interface. We then continued to add support to the various Citrix products. 2008, we added full radius support. 2013, we integrated with Netscaler with our SMS passcode solution. And since then have also integrated our IDaaS solution, which is our identity as a service solution into Citrix. And we have been validated as a Citrix Ready partner, and we integrate across multiple Citrix products. So before I kind of dive into the integration itself and Entrust, I'd like to sort of hand it over to Daniel to talk a little bit about the Citrix environments.
All right, well, thank you, Rohan. And just as a quick intro, I used to be in the development team. I recently moved over to the Citrix Cloud Product Management team, and I'm currently overseeing the identity platform. So as you all know, Citrix enables secure access to native web and SaaS applications. And before I talk about Citrix Cloud and identity, I'll give a few quick facts about Citrix. Rohan, if you want to move over to the next slide. So we've been in the business of securing access to applications for over 25 years. We have over 100 million workspace app user deployments. We're the first VDI vendor to launch a cloud-based VDI service. And we're the only provider capable of delivering VDI on premises, hybrid DAS, and fully managed DAS. If you move over to the next slide, yeah, so for those of you who may not be familiar with Citrix Cloud, I'll just give a very quick overview of what it is and list out some of the services that we offer. And then we'll talk about identity. So Citrix Cloud is a platform that hosts and administers Citrix Cloud services. It connects to your resources through connectors on any cloud or infrastructures that you choose. And that could be on premises, public cloud, private cloud, or even hybrid cloud. So the list of services that you see on the slide is not an exhaustive list, and it's continuously evolving. But you may be familiar with some or most of them. We have Citrix Desktop as a service, which most of you may also know as Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop. Session Recording Service, Workspace Environment Management, ITSM Adapter for ServiceNow. We have a number of NetScaler offerings, the Secure Private Access, Zen Server, and the last but not least, Citrix Analytics Service, which gives you data and insights for all the various services above. So next slide, Rohan. All right, so for you to take advantage of the various services that we talked about, you would first have to log in and authenticate to the platform if you're an administrator, or to the workspace if you're a subscriber or end user. As an administrator, if you log into the platform, you would perform all the typical administrator tasks, such as adding, removing administrators, adding, removing end users. You would configure the various services that you have. We give you monitoring, logging, notifications capabilities. And you would also manage your licenses, orders, and entitlements for your organization. Now, on the end user side, you would log into the workspace, which is a screenshot that you see on the right-hand side, where you, by the way, you would log in through either Workspace app or via the browser, HTML5. And you'd be presented with a list of applications and desktops that have been previously provisioned for you. And you can launch them from right there and then. In both of the scenarios, for administrators and end users, we support all the various major identity providers via OIDC or SAML integration, depending on the use case. And of course, Entrust is one of those identity providers. In fact, it's a excuse me, it is a Citrix Ready partner. So Rohan, if you want to move over to the next slide. And what Citrix Ready means is that we've done extensive validation and testing with Entrust, and we fully support it as an IDP for the Citrix environments. The integration with Entrust is a SAML integration and supports, as I mentioned before, administrators for AD-backed groups and users, but it also supports integration with Citrix Gateway, which allows you to manage your fully on-premises environments. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Rohan to talk through some of the most advanced, more advanced security and authentication features that Entrust can provide on top of Citrix Cloud. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. So before I dive into the solution itself, I'd like to sort of give you a brief overview of who Entrust is, who we are, what we do. So we've been around for over 50 years. We have about $850 million in revenue, 44 global offices, and more than 1,000 plus partners, including Citrix. We've been primarily in the security space from our identity solution aspect. We provide identity for 100 million plus, both workforce and consumer identities. We do identity verification for over 200 plus countries, and we secure multiple resources with our various software solutions that include identity as a service, our PKI as a service, our certificate solutions, our payment cards, and much more. So just to give you a bit of background about Entrust Identity and Access Management, we are a full suite of identity and access management solutions. We provide authentication, authorization, management of identities. So from an authentication perspective, we provide passwordless identity proofing or identity verification, adaptive risk-based authentication, which I'll talk in a little bit here. We also provide SSO, single sign-on for both cloud and on-prem and hybrid environments. We've also launched our social login aspect for consumers. And from a management perspective, we offer user provisioning, policy management, self-service password resets, and much more. We also have a flexible deployment option where you can deploy identity as service, which is our main offering. But we also have an on-premise solution for organizations that really want sort of a more controlled data residency requirement. We also have easy-to-use mobile SDKs that you can drop into your applications to take advantage of the various capabilities that the Entrust IAM solution offers. So one thing I want to talk about before we dive into the identity and access management solution is Zero Trust. So Zero Trust is, a framework. It's not a solution. A lot of times you hear about Zero Trust solutions, but really it is a framework. The three tenets of Zero Trust, right? Verify users explicitly, provide least privileged access, and assume breach. So if you look at that first tenet of verify users explicitly, that's kind of where our solutions from a multi-factor authentication, passwordless, and high assurance comes into play. We make sure that you can identify a user and verify their identities with greater security, while also sort of having that balance between user experience and sort of security, because it is a balance between the two. And when you're incorporating different MFA factors and step-up authentication mechanisms. So with that, just kind of briefly giving a overview of the various multi-factor options that we offer from an Entrust perspective. We offer the knowledge-based verification, Q&A. We also offer passwords, voice-based one-time passcodes, SMS one-time passcodes, email, grid cards, which I'll talk in a couple of slides later, mobile push notifications, FIDO 2 keys, mobile smart credential, and passkeys. So one thing I do want to talk about here is the fact that passwords are sort of the weakest factor when you're authenticating a user. So organizations have implemented multi-factor authentication over the last few years. But as we've seen, multi-factor authentication is not built the same across different authenticators. So you have authenticators on the low end of the security spectrum that don't quite offer the same security as we see from some of the high assurance authenticators like the FIDO 2 keys, the PKI-based mobile smart credential that we offer from Entrust, and so on. In fact, if you look at some of the options here, like the mobile push notification, for example, there's been a lot of attacks that involve MFA. So I can talk about one in the most recent past where a company was compromised through a user. So the user's credentials, contact information was social engineered by an attacker. The attacker then took advantage of those credentials and first factor, triggered MFA notifications through using that compromised credential, and basically overwhelmed the user with a number of push notifications. They then contacted the user through WhatsApp, posing as the user's organization's IT department, and convinced the user to accept one of these notifications, which the user did, and they were able to gain access to their VPN, move laterally within the network, and gain access to other resources that they were then able to exfiltrate from the network. So all that to mention, right, multi-factor gives you better protection than just passwords, but you also need to look at, the types of multi-factor authenticators that you're using within your environment. So if you look at the more high assurance factors with FIDO 2 keys and mobile smart credentials, for example, they provide a better security from being resistant to remote-based attacks through phishing, MFA fatigue, or adversary in the middle type of attacks. I briefly touched upon grid cards. So grid cards is a very unique sort of authenticator that we have here from the Entrust IAM solution. And the use case here is really when you have field employees or frontline employees that need to use MFA to authenticate into systems, but do not always have access to a mobile device. Grid cards is a great use case there from an MFA perspective. Basically, it's a grid of numbers. And in this example here, you get an MFA challenge that asks you for a value in a certain cell. So for example, what's the value in cell E5? It's X7. And you can have a combination of these that are asked for any given challenge. Now, the use case here is imagine a call center environment where the call center is outsourced to a third party in a different country. And these employees have access to your customers' critical PII data, for example. And they need to multi-factor into the systems that house this PII data. So since they're not able to take in a mobile device into the environment where they're providing the support, grid cards is a great alternative to provide multi-factor authentication. These are unique for every user. They can be deactivated when required. They can be generated, printed out on a piece of paper, emailed even to the user. Now, the alternative to using grid cards in that kind of use case is a hardware token, but the cost overheads from a hardware token is extremely high because you generally have greater turnover from an employee perspective in these use cases. So the hardware token needs to get shipped back, reconfigured, and sent back. They get broken, lost, and so on. So grid cards provides a low-cost MFA form factor for use cases that involves frontline, field, as well as call center employees. Now, this can also work in conjunction with other systems that you already have in place. So it can work as a second factor to existing systems that you have in your environment. The PKI mobile smart credential with the Bluetooth proximity, this is again another unique sort of offering from Entrust. Basically, we use certificates to convert the user's mobile device into a trusted device. And then it uses Bluetooth proximity to log the user in to, let's say, a laptop or a desktop. So when the user walks up close to the laptop or desktop, the laptop or desktop triggers a login mechanism on the user's mobile phone. This is all done through Bluetooth. So the user then authenticates themselves using biometrics, so either Face ID or Touch ID, for example. They authenticate themselves into the mobile application, your identity application, and then they gain access to the laptop or desktop. Now, to take this one step further, using single sign-on into the various applications, you can create a true passwordless approach for your employees, where they can log in securely using biometrics and a trusted device into their workstations or laptops and into any applications that they're using. Another side benefit here is using the same sort of approach to email signing and encryption, as well as digital document signing. Now, we talked about zero trust in the beginning. When we talk about MFA, MFA is one aspect from a security standpoint. We want to look at security from a layered approach. So on top of just adding in MFA, a lot of our customers and users look at adding adapter risk-based authentication. So what this does is looking at various types of inputs. So things like transaction attributes, time of day of week login, IP address, geolocation, velocity. Velocity, for example, is, let's say a user logs in from New York in US at 11 a.m. Eastern, and then the same user logs in from London, UK 5 minutes later. You know that sort of travel velocity for a user is not possible. So the account has been compromised in some fashion. So you want to take corrective action. So in terms of either blocking that request outright or challenging that request with a separate or a different authenticator to make sure that the user that's logging in is who they say they are. Now, one thing that's sort of unique here as well is these are configurable from an application as well as user group perspective. You can apply different weights to different risk factors. So for example, if I know that all my users are located globally, so they can come in from any geolocation, I want to add a weight of 0 to geolocation, because that really doesn't add any value from a risk factor perspective. So you can do that with our solution here. So adding this additional layer provides that zero trust approach where you're layering in security to the multi-factor authentication aspect. So with that, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the Entrust and Citrix integration. So the first one I'll talk about is Workspace. We offer multi-factor authentication for users logging into Workspace. This is done through a SAML integration. And you can use any one of the multi-factor options that we have to log the user in, including the grid card authentication that I talked about for the unique use cases. So you can use that to log into your Citrix Workspace. And the same thing with Gateway. You can use Entrust for your multi-factor authentication or passwordless authentication into your Citrix Gateway environments. We use soft tokens. We offer soft tokens, the grid card authentication, as well as the FIDO key, which is more of a high assurance option. And we also offer the mobile push notification to log into your Citrix environments. Now, one thing I do want to mention again in the mobile push notification is we do it slightly differently. So when you get a push notification from an application that you're trying to log into, the contextual information of the IP address, the location, the application that you're trying to sign into is not sent in the same payload as the notification itself. It's in fact sent through the server to the identity application. You can only see the contextual information once you authenticate yourself with biometrics. So using Face ID and Touch ID to log in, only then can you actually look at the contextual information to confirm that you want to allow that particular request, and that it's you that's making that request for authentication. So that's a little bit unique compared to the regular push notifications that we talk about. Now, with that, I'd like to sort of walk through a quick sort of short demo on how the SAML integration takes place between the two systems. So I have a pre-recorded video here that I'll play, and I'll walk through it. See if you have any questions at the end. So here we have the Entrust login that comes up in a little bit here. So you log into your Entrust identity application, and you can use either one of these options, which is a soft token, a mobile push notification, for example, here, where you see the contextual information, and you can log into your workspace. Now, the way this works is you log into the Entrust Identity as a Service console, and you go into applications and the SAML configuration screen, where you copy the entity ID and the single sign-on URLs. You then export a SAML signing certificate through the IDaaS console. IDaaS is the Identity as a Service portal. We verify that the attributes that you are configuring, you can configure custom attributes here that correspond to your Citrix environment. So user ID, email, SID, and so on. You can add that here. Map the attributes to the directory attributes as well. So you see that happening here. And then you can log into the Citrix Cloud dashboard and go to the Identity and Access Management page, where you will then click on Connect on the SAML 2.0 and enter in the entity ID that you copied over earlier, add in the single sign-on URL, and set the binding mechanism as HTTP redirect. You can then upload the SAML signing certificate that you downloaded earlier. Verify that the attribute values match to the ones you entered in the Entrust IDaaS console. And you can download the metadata. So once you download the metadata, you can go back to the Entrust application, click on SAML integration. We have a Citrix integration there, where you upload the XML file that you got from the Citrix Workspace. Select the user ID attribute. And certificate, and you're good to go. These were the attributes that you defined earlier. Now, one thing we're going to see here is resource rules. So this is kind of like the risk-based authentication that I talked about here. So I just want to touch upon this. You can set different weights to different risk factors, as you can see. And you can also define different authenticators you want to use depending on your risk scores. So if you're low risk, you can use certain factors. If you're medium risk, you can use others. Or you can just outright deny access if it's more of a critical resource that you're protecting. And once you do that, you're kind of set for your users to use the Entrust integration with Citrix to log into your Citrix environments. So now that we saw that demo, we want to talk about the value from Entrust to Citrix customers. Just summarizing what we talked about here, we provide strong authentication, single sign-on with established SAML workflows. We have an adaptive risk-based engine that can look at different factors when authenticating a user. We offer the broadest range of authentication options from an MFA perspective, whether that's mobile, physical, or portal-based. We offer a true passwordless solution with adaptive MFA. And we can offer different deployment modules as well from either a cloud-based service or an on-premise solution. We have a global support and partner channel focus. We are a Citrix-ready partner, like we talked about. We have multiple channel partners that are common as well that can help you with the integration. And we can help you set the integration up. So with that, I'll turn it over to see if you have any questions on the floor.
Okay, I've got quite a few, bit of a broad range of questions actually, and I know I mentioned before the meeting that identity is not really my strong spot, so I wasn't going to try and answer any of them myself, but I think I know the answer to this first one, where we're talking, does Entrust, the Entrust solution, does it work with on-premises Citrix deployments, or has it got any sort of reliance on Citrix Cloud? I think I heard you mention that it works with any Citrix deployment, right? So on-premises as well.
Yeah. So we have Radius integration as well as SAML integration. So NetScaler is also supported with our Radius and SAML integrations.
Right, cool. So that's good from that one. I've also got a question about custom integrations with NetScalers. I mean, is there any customized stuff that you do with the kind of NetScaler appliance or anything like that? I don't have any further detail other than that around it.
Yeah, so it's not really custom, but like, yeah, we do support NetScaler integration with SAML or Radius. So we do support NetScaler as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. And I mean, obviously, you know, any sort of, you know, any business, any enterprise going in and setting up something like Entrust, I mean, it's got to have their own sort of back-end authentication, you know, with Active Directory and whatnot. And does that mean you can do it with Azure Active Directory as well as standard AD as well?
Yes, we can. We can connect into an existing Active Directory. We can be a second factor authentication for an existing IDP that you have in your environment. We do have a lot of organizations that use us as a second factor. We talked about grid cards because, you know, it's kind of unique to us, as well as our mobile smart credentials. So we can use an existing IDP. We can be the second factor. And we work both ways as well. So we can be the first factor and vice versa.
So that's interesting because I've actually got a request about somebody asking for a bit more detail about the actual sort of grid authentication and what are, you know, what's the kind of killer sort of feature of that? What are the big advantages to having grid authentication instead of, you know, something more conventional or traditional, as it were?
Sure, yeah. So the grid authentication is great in terms of like specific use cases. So if you think about like your field employees, right? Like think about your police services, for example, or your medical field staff, or your retail frontline employees, for example, right? Providing a secure multi-factor authentication comes with higher costs when you're using mobile smartphone-based MFA, because you're then going to have a support infrastructure. You're going to have to support those MFA options. Grid cards provides a lower overhead because you can print these out on a piece of paper. They can have set expiry dates. You can configure them to expire at a certain date. You can configure them to be more complex. So you can add more characters, more variables into the grid to make it more complex and harder to guess from an attacker perspective. It is also advantages compared to using a hardware token. I think I kind of mentioned a little bit about this because hardware tokens need to be reconfigured when you have an employee leave. They're broken or lost quite often. With a grid card, if it's printed on a piece of paper, if it's lost or stolen, for example, you can generate a new one just as easily. You can also email these out, so it need not just be printed out. You can also email it out. So it is pretty unique, and it has been used in a lot of use cases from a frontline and field perspective.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize you're actually talking about something you could actually sort of print out, which, I mean, I can say the advantages around that, and also think sort of certain areas where, you know, people might mislay a piece of paper or something and not realize they've done it. Whereas if it's on their phone, right, it's a big emergency if they lose their phone, sort of thing. Okay, that's very interesting. And how does MFA actually feed in to that sort of zero trust framework, right? You know, because zero trust is one of those it's one of those buzzwords that we almost see around quite a lot, right? And people are quite keen on saying these things because they get people feel like they're moving in the right direction. How does having this sort of strong or sort of beyond MFA, how does it help with that?
Sure, yeah, for sure. So when we talk about MFA, right, like the three main tenets, one is verify users explicitly. So when you're trying to verify a user, one of the things is making sure that the user's identity is not compromised. So having a strong form factor from an MFA perspective helps with that first tenet of zero trust, if you will. using high assurance options, right? Like the FIDO 2 keys, the mobile smart credentials. One thing I will mention is when we talk about MFA, you always hear about 3 different factors. You hear about knowledge, which is something you know, which is either your question answer, your passwords, possession, which is something you have, which is either like your mobile smartphone, your FIDO 2 keys, and so on. Inherence, which is kind of biometrics using Face ID and Touch ID. A lesser known form factor that we don't talk about a lot is location. So using something like a Bluetooth proximity finder. So the mobile smart credential, for example, uses Bluetooth to make sure that the user is close to the device. So like the laptop, desktop that they're logging into. So this eliminates a lot of threats from a remote actor perspective. And that's really crucial, right? Because most of the other lower security MFA form factors can be compromised through remote attacks. Now, I'm not saying that you need to use this in every single case, but for your more critical resources, for your higher value users, you may want to consider using sort of a high assurance option. Now, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to add something in there, but continue, finish off.
Sure, yeah.
I'll drop it in afterwards.
Sure, yeah. So just one last comment I want to make is the third tenet of Zero Trust, right? When you talk about assumed breach, is you're trying to limit damage. So it's eventual that at some point an attacker is going to get into your network, but you want to limit the damage. So adding in MFA to different resources. So for example, if you have like a Windows server on premise and you want to limit access to that, generally this has just been secured by username passwords in the past, but adding MFA with a different form factor helps mitigate some of that lateral movement when an attacker is in your network, for example. So there's ways that from an identity perspective you can implement a more stronger, robust Zero Trust framework.
Well, that's actually interesting you should mention that, because I was going to mention about the lateral movement sort of thing, right? Because I mean, all the conversations I've had with people about Zero Trust, one of the fundamentals of that is that people will get in eventually, right? And I mean that situation you described in your presentation about them using WhatsApp on top of multiple MFA requests, it just goes to show the lengths that people will go to get that kind of sort of foothold in a network. So can you do that like almost like an endpoint MFA for like a high value workstation, or even like an MFA for when a particular application starts or something like that?
Yeah, so the risk-based authentication that I talked about earlier, right? So where you can configure different risk factors, right? With our solution, you can actually do it on a per application, on a per user group basis. So it's fairly granular in where you can define it to be, higher sensitivity to certain form factors. So for example, if you know that a user is generally from the same geolocation or from the same IP address, you want to add a higher weightage to that particular risk score or risk factor, so you can mitigate some of those attacks as well. So if someone's logging in from a device for the first time, for example, you want to have a higher assurance authenticator used to authenticate that particular request. So you can configure it accordingly in the identity console.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually, because I mean, I work in finance, right? And it's security crazy out there as well. And the possible, I mean, what you want to avoid, right, is, and I know you mentioned this in your kind of presentation as well, is talking about sort of, becoming wary of doing MFA prompts and running the risk that it becomes almost second nature, right? But yeah, if it was up to our security teams, you'd get MFA prompted every time you clicked something or typed something in, right? Which is the kind of thing that they want. But I mean, could you even like sort of do something like tune that kind of challenge response? Like, so maybe, when a user's, flagging some kind of risk factor, rather than just like present another challenge, could you even do something like email the security team or email their line manager or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. You can block the request outright if you think that this is a critical application and you want to make sure that the risk score for a user logging in needs to be really low. Anything above a low risk score needs to be blocked. So you can like block access, so that way your resource is secure. And then the admin obviously gets notified from the IDaaS portal they can go in and look at the login request and get notified that way.
And can you almost do this on I mean, this is speaking from my own personal experience, but I've noticed recently, when I'm paying for things, whereas normally I would use like sort of chip and pin, but now very occasionally, or whether I've been doing like sort of, must have been a set of transactions in a specific period of time or something like that, I'm being asked to insert my card and type my pin in, and is that the same sort of response we're talking? Hey, maybe even like at random, just throwing up an extra sort of response to keep people on their toes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what risk-based authentication does, right? So for example, if you are logging in from your mobile phone, from your home for the last year, so your IP address, unless you're using sort of a dynamic IP address, hasn't really changed, right? You're using the same device that you're logging into. So, the authentication mechanism is less friction, right? Because there's a lot of knowns there. Your risk score is really low. You want to make it as seamless and easy as possible. But let's say, for the first time in a year, you travel to, let's say, a different continent, and you're logging in from a different IP address, different geolocation for the very first time, your risk score shoots up because that is something that is unknown from past behavior. So you want to have a different authenticator for that purpose, and you can do that. So in the short demo that I showed, you can actually set it up based on the risk levels and add the different weights there.
And does that depend on any configuration you need to do on your own sort of back end in as your AD, or is it all kind of done on the Entrust side of things?
It's all done on the Entrust side of things. So you set it up all here once and you're good to go.
Okay, so that leads me on to another question I've got here, which is basically saying, how long would it take to set this up in a proof of concept? Is it just that simple as going in and setting a few config settings?
Yeah, you saw the video, it was a few minutes. It's pretty straightforward. We do have free trials of our solution. So if you go to entrust.com on the identity page, you can sign up for a free trial. It's a 60-day free trial. You can explore all the options that's available there.
And is that fully featured as well, right? It's just time limited.
It's fully featured. It's just time limited to 60 days.
Okay, cool. I think that is covering me off. Apart from, I've got one at the end saying, what are the big advantages of you? I mean, I know a lot of people do use Microsoft Authenticator, right, as a default. What are the sort of killer features? I mean, I know we've covered the grid cards, the risk-based authentication, but is there anything else beyond that you would say that differentiates you from almost Microsoft, which I know they're not a free offering, but everybody considers them free, right? Because they don't pay any more for them. Sure.
Yeah, the mobile smart credential is another one that's pretty unique to us, right? It's high assurance. It does offer a true unique passwordless option. The other thing is we also support div credentials, as well as sort of the YubiKey and FIDO 2 keys with div credentials on them. So in certain scenarios like your police services and certain federal government employees, for example, they can use our solution there as well.
Cool. Just a quick one for myself, really. Just thinking out. I mean, I work in kind of like the enterprise architecture sort of side of things as well as engineering. And I mean, do you see that the world is going to go fully passwordless? Will passwords become a thing of the past and will authenticate in many different ways?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's where we're headed, right? We've seen that passwords don't work. Either they're too weak. I read a stat somewhere that an average employee has access to over 100+ applications, both work and personal related. So they get password fatigue. They start reusing passwords. Passwords compromised on one application. The attackers then using that in different applications, getting access. Or the complexity of the password is so large that the user continuously keeps forgetting their password and needs to reset it. It adds a lot of friction. If you look at the consumer space, not the workspace side of things, that frustrates users, gets them to drop off from using your services and things like that. So we will and we are seeing a uptick in moving to a true passwordless solution. The other aspect I do want to mention is you probably heard about this in recent announcements from some of the big platform vendors like Apple, Microsoft, Google with the Android and Windows and iOS is the support for passkeys. So passkeys is basically converting your phone into an authenticator, but also using public key infrastructure, so a private key, public key pair to authenticate into applications. We'll see more and more of that as well, and we're also adding support for it as it becomes as it gains adoption, and we make it easier with our SDKs and APIs to offer that kind of solution.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. That, because I mean, I totally resemble that remark, right? I mean, I've got all of my passwords for all sorts of different things, and I tend to put them in a OneNote document. But obviously, I realized that's terrible having them in plain text. So now I've got like a secret code that tells me which password I've used. But all it needs somebody to do is to get some sort of idea as to how my brain's working around that, and they'll have all sorts of fun with access to all the things. And I mean, I always thought I was safe for ages because I constantly forget my passwords for things and constantly have to reset them. But you're absolutely right there as well. It may add a bit of security because even you can't remember your password, so it's always getting reset. But it's certainly not an aid to frictionless working, as you say. So it is interesting that that's the way we're heading. I think we're good on questions from there, though. We don't have any more at the moment, but that is very interesting, actually, because there's a lot of food for thought there, and it's good to hear about the integrations that you've got with Citrix to add that sort of value in there.
Yeah, for sure. And please feel free to reach out. We have the info@entrust.com email there if you have any more questions.
There we are. Okay. Thank you so much. It was a lot of great information. I know some of you may have opted in for a chance to win the drone. So just stay tuned. As soon as I finish this webinar, I will pull the report and do a random selection and let you know who the winner is. So look out for an email from me, or follow us on Twitter to see who won. And then also, I think when I close the webinar out, you'll get a link to a quick survey. It's short, it's anonymous, and it's for CUGC use only. We just like to get your feedback so that we know what kind of webinars and content you're looking for in the future. So please do fill that out. It helps us. And with that, I think we are ready to wrap up. Excuse me. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Rohan. And thank you, James, for being here today.
No problem. My pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you on another CUGC event again soon. Bye.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.